This podcast is part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club, a program designed to help all podcasts reach their full potential. For information about joining the Robots Radio Rocket Club, check out robotsradio.net.
Hey all you heroes and champions, crows, pirates, and inquisitors. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast. I'm Shelby.
And I'm Austin.
And we are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From the Maker to Lyrium to Aravels, we will cover it all. There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello, welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast. I am one of your hosts, Teecup or Austin. Either is fine. And I'm here with my other host.
And wife. I'm Shelby or Shecup.
Yeah, and we're here to talk about all things Dragon Age and the lore about Dragon Age. So if you are here because you love Dragon Age, you're in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, we've got an interesting topic. You know, we're really close to being done with our faction season. Pretty soon we're going to move into season 3. Can you believe that?
I know.
I genuinely cannot. And even sooner than that, we'll probably hit, we're definitely going to hit our 1-year anniversary that's coming up in a couple months. It's crazy. Okay, well, we are finishing up these faction episodes with some random, some pretty significant factions. So today, we've got a big one to talk about. One that is very prominent in Dragon Age Inquisition. And that faction is the Venatori.
Ooh. Dun,
yeah,
dun,
they're very
dun.
annoying. They're very annoying. So, you ready to dive right in? Do you want to talk about what you already know about the Venatori, Austin? Do you know anything about the Venatori?
I know that the Venatori are easier enemies than the Red Templars.
Is that all you know about them, really?
I know that they're a rogue Tevinter faction. I know that they are not like operating like the official command of the Magisterium. I know that they're manipulated by Corypheus.
They're also pretty manipulative themselves.
Yeah, that's what I know.
Okay, well, at its most basic level, the Venatori, they're an armed cult of Tevinter nationalists and supremacists. So not great dudes. And like most of them are dudes. I don't know, I guess we meet a few female Venatori, but not very many.
Calpurnia.
Yeah, she was the only one that came to mind. So and you can convince her to leave Corypheus. So
yeah.
But they are loyal to Corypheus, like wholeheartedly, and one of the main enemies of Dragon Age Inquisition. So at their core, they believe that Corypheus will restore the order and the glory of the ancient Tevinter Imperium. So they attempt to sow chaos throughout the rest of Thedas in order to make this come more quickly. They are not officially sanctioned in any capacity by Tevinter officially. I say that officially because if you read the comics, and I think some of the novels too, or at least Tevinter Knights, you will see that they may not be sanctioned officially, but unofficially they are encouraged behind the scenes. So and the people in the Venatori can be very, very, very powerful magisters.
Case in point for our side character later in the episode.
Right, absolutely. And others too. So in the Inquisition, we encounter the Venatori in almost every single area that we can go. I think the only places that we don't encounter them are the Frostbacks, the Descent DLC, Val Royeaux, and the Fallow Mire.
We do technically encounter them in Val Royeaux.
Say more.
In Calpurnia's quest, you go to Val Royeaux to find the first crystal?
Yeah, but you don't encounter anyone.
There's Venatori agents in the room.
Okay. Okay, well then take out Val Royeaux.
Also, isn't the Winter Palace in Val Royeaux?
No, the Winter Palace is in Halam Sharal.
Wrong. That's right. I'm dumb. Did I even play these? Did I even play these games?
You weren't paying attention, clearly. And it is important to note that many of the non-mage Venatori enemies appear to be slaves. And if you look closely, you will see often chains on them. Like if you're fighting a Venatori rogue, they will often have chains on them. Mage Venatori do not appear to have these, which is a very sad and sickening twist, but also makes total sense when thinking about the Venatori and their goals. And so I am impressed that BioWare had that kind of attention to detail.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that strikes me at the Venatori and just like their involvement is that like the level of their involvement only slightly changes if you side with the Red Templars, whereas the Red Templars are very diminished if you side with the mages. Or if you side with, like, if you go to the champion, the champion of the just mission and side with the Templars, like the Red Templars are almost non-existent in the game. They're heavy in the Imperies and in the Emerald Graves, but other than that, not really.
Right, but either way, the Venatori are there.
Which makes sense to me in attention to detail because the Venatori are a faction in Tevinter. Whereas the Red Templars are a manipulation of an established faction that you can stop.
Absolutely. And it should be noted, we will talk about the Red Templars and Red Lyrium, not in this season. It will be in next season, but we will talk about them. So we're not just ignoring them. So let's move on to structure a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we aren't really sure how the exact ranks and structure break down specifically, but we do know that there are ranks within each class. So for the mages, which I'm going to start at the top, mages are going to be at the top. It is a Tevinter faction, of course. So you have Spellbinder and you have Mage. So for me, that leads me to think Spellbinder is a higher rank than Mage. For rogues, you have a Marksman and you have Stalkers. I think Marksmen would also be higher than Stalkers. And then Warrior, interestingly, has 3. They have Brute, Zealot, and Gladiator. To me, I think Gladiator would be the one I think would be at the top. But again, we're not really for sure how that all shakes out.
Right. I think maybe it's a little bit different in function because I think just by the names, and I don't really have any evidence other than encountering them, like a Spellbinder to me is someone who binds demons. Who are just like uses spells to bind things and enchantments, whereas a mage is just a general offensive mage. A marksman is an archer rogue versus a stalker, which is probably going to be a dual wield sneak up stealth assassin, tempest versus assassin in that way. And then I don't know how to change that. All I know is that the Venatori brutes are the ones with the big axes. The Zealots and Gladiators both wield the big tower shields that make me really mad.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point, though, about like the different subclasses for sure. And then the last thing I have to say about this structure is that we don't know much about it, but we do know whoever you side with and get as the second in command, Calpurnia or Samson, whichever one of them you encounter in the game, they are Corypheus's second in command.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about because Samson isn't even a Templar.
Well, he was.
Yeah.
But he's not. I mean, like most recently, no, but
we never meet Samson as a Templar.
That's true. But we know he was a Templar.
That's true. That's just a funny point to me, is all.
Well, let's get into their history and beliefs a little bit. So obviously they revere Corypheus, right? And they like basically worship him. And they do this because they believe that he will turn them into gods and or kings. It's kind of mixed. But that once they are turned into gods or kings, they will rule over Thedas once Corypheus ascends to the Black City and becomes a god.
I greatly disapprove.
So I don't want to be offensive. But This kind of reminds me of Mormonism. Like, because, you know, and I'm sure I'm operating off of stereotypes that I've just like learned growing up in my religious studies. But there is a Mormon belief out there where it basically says, like, when you die as a Mormon, I don't know if it's turned into a god, but you get to rule over your own planet. And then God rules over all of us, right? This reminds me of that.
I can see that. I don't know how implemented that belief is. The Mormon Church did come out and say, no, you don't get your own planet anymore.
Okay, so they changed that.
Yeah, like back in 2014.
But like, that's a thing. That's not, I didn't make that up.
No, that's a real thing. That's was a belief.
Doesn't it have something to do with Moroni?
Moroni's just an angel.
Yeah, but doesn't it have something to do with him?
I don't know Mormonism enough to say an answer for that.
Okay, well, this reminds me of that. I'm just saying.
Okay.
I'm sorry to all the Mormons out there who are offended. I would be genuinely shocked if there are Mormons listening to our show, but you never know. So back to Thedas. So the Venatori, their main effort is to destroy all of the southern nations of Thedas, at least until the new Tevinter Imperium under Corypheus emerges, which makes total sense because they want to go back to the olden days when Tevinter and its control reached all the way to Antiva and Ravane and all the way down like into the Korkari wilds and all the way through Orlais and Navarra and the Free Marches and Ferelden, all over Thedas. They want to conquer the whole continent. They're very colonial.
There is a ideology that this reminds me of, which is Manifest Destiny, which is the idea that, like, you know, we're divinely destined to this land and to own this land and to rule over it, and it's our divine right to have.
Which in American history is deeply, deeply problematic and is the root cause of our mistreatment of anyone who was here in this country before white people came over. So it's not a good thing at all. But yes, I agree with you. I think that Tevinter very much embodies this concept because they feel like they have a right to everywhere else. At least the Venatori do, I should say specifically. And that leads me into my next point, which is that it's really important to note that the Venatori do not represent the views of the average everyday person from Tevinter, or even the views of the Tevinter Imperium as a whole. It's really important to note that throughout Tevinter, there are regular, average, everyday people who are not bigots, who do not want to conquer the whole world, who just want to live their lives, right? There is a diversity of opinion throughout Tevinter. And that's really important to say. We don't want to write off the whole of Tevinter just because of a subset group. It's kind of the same thing with our country, I think. You know, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, I think it's really easy to demonize the other side. And the crazies, whoever you think they are, do not represent the whole of the people in the United States, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And like, it's good to know that, like, as of right now, and especially like what Dorian tells us, is that Tevinter does not want war with Orlais right now.
Yeah.
Not with the Qun breathing down its neck and everything else. And like, it's, as we noted in our Tevinter episode, one of them, that Tevinter mages are not exposed to Orlesian Templars and how they work. And so they're kind of the stuff of nightmares for a Tevinter mage. The fact that they can just turn off their magic. It would be a very frightening thing. And I bet there is a lot of fear of, like, do not poke the Orlesian beast.
That's probably true. Yeah. And Dorian does say, like, in Inquisition that, and he insists this actually, that the official governmental bodies of the Imperium will disavow any and all suggestions of involvement with the Venatori, and he even goes so far as to call them dangerous cultists. So that's pretty significant. They're not allied with the Venatori, even though, and he does tell us this too, that many magisters will probably privately think that the Venatori have the right idea. And in a discussion about the Venatori at Skyhold, Cullen even says that he believes the Venatori are a separate sect of fanatics. They are not the beginning of an official Tevinter invasion into the rest of Thedas. So they are their own group. They are a minority group, and they don't reflect the views of the average everyday citizen.
Yeah, and I think that would be true. It's like not, and the same thing is true in Orlais. Not every Orlesian citizen or Ferelden citizen is, think mages are just walking like demon husks ready to sprout and attack them at any moment.
True.
Or even think that elves deserve to be enslaved and live in poverty. Like,
also true.
You're going to find diversity of people and opinion in every country that exists in Thedas and exists in our world.
Because that's just how people work. No one is ever totally unified 100% behind anything. That's just how people are. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the Venatori and how they operated throughout Dragon Age Inquisition. So what do they do after Corypheus's defeat? Well, many of them, especially those who had never admitted to being official members of the cult in the first place, distanced themselves from the Venatori, as of course you could have guessed. But there is a good remaining number of loyalists to the Venatori, and they frequently stir up trouble. And actually, the Antivan Crows have been taking contracts to eliminate members of the Venatori. 8 members of the Venatori have already been killed in Tevinter Nights when Lucanus Delamort takes a contract on Ambrose Forfex, the Wigmaker, who is also a member of the Venatori. So while many of the other assassinations of the Venatori members have been kept from the public, the death of Forfex and around 40 of his guests at his own wig show are too big to be kept quiet. So in Tevinter, as we are currently aware of in this limbo of years situation, Venatori members, especially prominent ones, are being eliminated and killed by the Antivan Crows, especially. So we also know they do still have loyalists, influential ones at that, but they are very much in a state of limbo. They are not a defunct faction. They are very much still around, but they have been lessened in power greatly.
How much do you think that it's Liliana just calling her old pal Zevran to arrange the death of these Venatori agents?
I don't think that at all, actually, because Zevran is not a member of the Crows. Zevran is, not part of them at all. And I would have to go back and reread Tevinter Nights, those chapters about this. Because I don't exactly remember if it says anything about who's ordering the contracts, but someone is. I wouldn't put it past the Inquisition to be the people doing that, but I don't think they're going through Zevran.
It could also be, it could be Dorian and his group. It could be another rogue Tevinter group that just wants the Venatori out of the way because they're bringing too much heat on Tevinter.
Absolutely. It could also be the new Divine, Victoria, whoever she may be. It could also be anyone, literally anyone.
It's got to have the coin.
Yeah, which, as we know, a lot of people in Thedas have money. You know what? I wouldn't even put it past the Archon of Tevinter. Well, I think now would be a good time for a break.
All right. Well, let's take that break. So we'll see you after the break.
So, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this.
I'm listening.
Ah, you've returned. A letter arrived for you.
All right. Well, welcome to the middle of the show where we talk about all things that don't have to do with the lore of Dragon Age. And so this is also a time we like to come and thank our patrons. And before I list our first 5 patrons, or or Shelby list them, whoever wants to do it. I want to say a special thank you and a fun announcement that we have our first enchanter level patron. So Derek B, thank you for coming and to be our first enchanter patron, the first one. I'm going to say first a lot. So that will mean that our patron episodes will be happening, and Derek will be joining us for that. And that's really exciting next week. And so that is very exciting. And thank you so much for your support.
Yeah, we're super appreciative, and we're super pumped to talk about Dragon Age next week with you, Derek. So anybody else, if you want to join us talking about Dragon Age on our patron episode, hop on in there, become a first enchanter patron. It's only $20 a month. We think it's pretty affordable, and it's a blast. So you want me to read the rest of our patrons?
Yeah, give us a thank you to the rest of our patrons.
All right. The rest of our patrons are Lisa M, Genesis, Fletcher M, and Zuba. Thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you. We really appreciate your support. And that's one of the reasons we do this podcast, is to meet other people who love Dragon Age and talk with them and nerd out and discuss the lore, discuss expectations. We love doing all of that. And a great place to do that with us is our personal Discord server, the Cups Podcasting and More. You can find that link in the episode description. We got channels for everything. We've got them for Dragon Age. We've got them for the Assassin's Creed Lorecast, which we also host. My other podcast, the Holocron Histories for Star Wars. We all talk about that stuff there. Also, if you want to see our dog, who is adorable and named Snips, we do post pictures of her there. So yeah, it's a really fun place to be. If you cannot support us on Patreon, there are other ways to support the podcast. Mainly which is tell your friends about it. If you enjoy our podcast, tell other people to come and listen. It's a great way to spread the podcast. The other way is to let other people know you enjoy the podcast by leaving reviews or ratings on Spotify. You do need to have an account on Spotify or Apple to leave a rating or review, but you don't have to listen to our podcast on those platforms. But if you leave a 5-star review with some words, we will read it on a future episode of the show. We do not have any new reviews to read today, so if you are just itching to have your review read, just go on and give us that rating. We're also still looking for heroes, hawks, and heralds. So if you have any of those that you want to share, you can join the Discord. You can reach to us out on Twitter at DA Lorecast. You could also send us an email at dalorecast@gmail.com. All right, well, let's get back into the episode.
My friend.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun.
Okay, so let's talk about how the Venatori are involved. So I want to go to a comic real quick, specifically the Magekiller comic. So in this one, basically we learn that the Tevinter Imperium does deny any suggestion that they've been involved with the Venatori. We learn that Archon Radonis hires Marius and Tessa, two people that we've talked about before, to assassinate members of the Venatori. Marius doesn't want to do this, and Tessa does, and that's a little bit of the conflict of the comic. But they're given 4 targets, all mages, all leaders within the Venatori: Havian Solara, Corinia Cralius, Paulus Nimian, and the one and only Calpurnia. And throughout the comic, you learn that Marius and Calpurnia were once lovers, and that's the major conflict of the comic. And it's a good one. So if you're interested in it, you should check it out. So their whole thing is that they were contracted to assassinate Venatori by the Archon of Tevinter. I don't think that Archon Radonis is doing this out of the goodness of his heart. I don't think he's doing this because he even really disagrees with what the Venatori are saying. I think he does this because he sees them as a threat and he wants to maintain his own power. But nonetheless, he does it. And it's not necessarily in an official capacity, like it's not publicized, but that's his official stance. And so we can't really accuse him of working with the Venatori, right?
Yeah, I think that for me, he probably does it as a way to say, like, hey, at least I did something. Like, I'm not with these Venatori. Get the heat off me. Like, don't pay attention to me.
Yeah. I think that and the fact that he's just trying to shore up his own power are the two biggest motivating factors for him. He's not doing this because he hates the Venatori. Like, if he wasn't the Archon, he could be part of them. We would never know. But back to the game. Throughout the events of the game, the Venatori can actually be fairly successful in their efforts, which is interesting because I feel like when playing Dragon Age Inquisition, it feels like Corypheus is just being defeated at every turn, at least after Haven. So when you see it that way, I think it makes a little bit more sense. But the Venatori infiltrate several different courts and cities at very high levels. That is, if the Inquisition doesn't stop them. And it's not always clear how to stop them, especially in war table missions. So some of the things they do. They infiltrate the courts of the Duke of Hunterfell. They infiltrate the courts of King Marcus Pentagast in Navarra. And they infiltrate the ranks of the Mortalitasi. So they're all throughout Navarra. They infect the water supply of humans in the Free Marches, specifically in Wycombe, and they blame it on elves. So we've got Navarra and the Free Marches now. They infiltrate the royal palace in Denerim in an attempt to assassinate the monarch of Ferelden. So now we've got Navarra, the Free Marches, and Ferelden. And as we know, of course, they are all throughout Orlais. And that is pretty much all of Southern Thedas. So they're doing work. They're putting in work. And they are especially prevalent in the western half of Orlais, in the western approach and the Hissing Wastes. They are just freaking everywhere out there.
Which makes sense because it's kind of the closest, I guess, point of Tevinter other than the Free Marches.
Yeah, I feel like Navarra is pretty close too.
But it's interesting to me, like, at least as the game's going on and their involvement is like, if you side with the mages and the Red Templars are your enemies, the next things you do, even though the Red Templars just attacked and sacked Haven, is go deal with Venatori. Whether that's the Venatori assassins at the Winter Palace and Wicked Eyes, Wicked Hearts, or if it's the Venatori manipulating the Grey Wardens at Adamant Fortress.
True. They're everywhere. And I think the game wants you to feel like that. So they also, in addition to just like infiltrating courts and palaces, they also use multiple groups of people and creatures to accomplish their goals, which you kind of just brought that up. So they use the skulls of the Tranquil to create the Ocularums, through which we, as the player characters, find all the shards. They use giants to excavate the ruins of Corocavis in the western approach. And they use giants to excavate the Temple of Solasan in the Forbidden Oasis. They also attempt to capture a high dragon for Corypheus to corrupt in the western approach. And they do this through attempting at least to use the renowned dragon expert, Professor Frederick of Serault from the University of Orlais. And then lastly, and most significantly, they use the Grey Wardens to infect them with a foe calling and convince them that another blight is happening, and all the quests with the Grey Wardens. So those are just some of the things they do. There's more stuff that I haven't mentioned, but that's the big stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they're terrible. It makes me think, like, are they the ones who also manipulated the Carta into trying to free Corypheus?
Yeah, interesting. Which came first, like the Venatori or Corypheus? It's very much a chicken or the egg situation.
I feel like the Venatori sentiment is probably something that's never gone away in Tevinter. Kind of like Dorian says, like there's a lot of people who privately think that they've got the right idea. So I think that maybe I would think that Corypheus might have come first. And like after hearing Hawk's reports, because obviously it's not a secret because Cassandra's asking Varric about it. Like, we've heard about this, and one, Varric can't keep his mouth shut.
True.
So I'm sure that there are Tevinter magisters and other people who hear of this Corypheus and they're like, a magister, like one of the original magisters is alive. Like, we need to find them.
But then why didn't they do that with the architect?
My only thing would be that the architect is more of a secret.
I think that BioWare forgot about the architect.
I mean, that's possible too. There's a lot of stuff in Awakening that I feel like they forgot.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Nathaniel Howe makes just like a brief appearance and he was a major player in Awakening. Like,
yeah, that's fair. Well, are you ready to hear about the known members of the Venatori?
Always.
Okay, so we've got obviously Calpurnia and Samson. We've got Cassius and Service, Duhame, Livius Aramond, aka the worst person in all of Inquisition, Garyon Alexius, and you can argue Fiona.
Fiona's not really willing. You could argue that.
Yeah, I don't really want to get into the argument. Yeah, she's very much tricked into it, but she also agrees. So,
well, that's a good segue to our side character.
That's true. Who is not Fiona?
No. So yeah, you want to tell us who it is? It's someone we've kind of talked about a little bit already, but we decided to dive a little deeper.
Yeah, so we talked about this person a couple weeks ago in Dorian's deep dive, but we felt like he deserved a little bit more. So Garyon Alexius is our side character for the day. And honestly, after I did the research for Dorian, I came to like a place where I felt for Alexius more. Because he's not he doesn't join the Venatori because he wants power and glory under Corypheus. He joins the Venatori so he can heal and fix his son from the blight. You know, that's a very, very, very different motivation than the other people who have joined Corypheus and the Venatori. So I feel some sympathy for him. But let's go back to the beginning. So Garyon is a Tevinter Magister. He is a member of the Venatori. He is the father to Felix, and he's a former mentor to Dorian. We meet him in Inquisition, and he's the main boss of the Mage's quest line. Garyon has taken over Redcliffe Castle, banishing Arl, Tegan, Garen. And he is manipulating them using time magic. So, if the Inquisitor sides with the mages, you obviously defeat Alexius, and you can pass judgment on him at Skyhold. So, you have 4 options. You can choose to execute him. You can choose to imprison him. You can choose to make him tranquil, or you can choose to make him serve the Inquisition with research.
I've done them all.
I have not. I've never made him tranquil. I just can't bring myself to it.
It is interesting because Alexius is one of the few people that you can personally execute. So, like, if you do that, you are the one who swings the sword to kill Alexius. If you make him tranquil, you suffer a lot of war table consequences for it. Especially if you're a mage and you've sided with the mages. Well, I guess you would have sided with the mages, but the mages under there, that's really a lot of consequences, and almost all of your mage companions disapprove greatly. Even
yeah,
Vivian.
I can imagine they would be very unhappy with that. It's very hypocritical too.
Yes,
to do that to another mage, like I can't imagine.
There are people who just making him serve, I think, probably has the least amount of consequences other than execution. You get a couple people who disapprove, like Cullen, Cassandra. Your more hardcore people who are like, don't trust Tevinter, don't trust mages. I mean, Liliana's all for it.
Yeah, that's I tend to pick make him serve the Inquisition and do research.
Imprisonment, I just feel like is I don't feel like it's a proper like punishment for his crimes. And I don't feel like I feel like Alexius at this point, when you judge him, he's very much at this point of like wanting to either like atone, like he doesn't, a lot of the people fight your judgment or move against it. I'm thinking of specifically the mage with Adamant Fortress, who's basically like, I'm a Tevinter mage, like you can't mess with me, like blah, 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 this, where Alexius is like, I did what I did for my son, Felix, and that's over. So you can do what you want with me.
Yeah.
And so that to me is a man who is ready for atonement, and serving the Inquisition is the best way to achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And that ties in perfectly with my next point, because before he became part of the Venatori, he made a name for himself. He was pretty famous in Tevinter. And he did this by excelling at being a magical researcher in the circle of Minrathous. So I think that giving him the punishment of research for being a researcher for the Inquisition is a fitting punishment, because it still allows him to use his gifts. You're just using it for your benefit, not Corypheus's. To me, if you're fighting a war, it seems very wasteful to execute someone who could be of use to you.
This is the whole Logain thing all over again.
What do you mean?
In your traumatizing Logain experience.
Okay, well, if you're I'll say it again. If you're in the middle of a war, it doesn't make much sense to execute someone who can be of use to you. I stand by that statement.
Even though you lost your boy?
I mean, I didn't romance him, so he wasn't really my boy.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
Anyway, we'll move on from the Logain situation. Well, it'll come back up when we do our Logain deep dive, I guess. But anyways, so let's get into what Garion's research was. So he, as you can probably guess, investigated the limits of known magical laws. So I'm not talking about like, don't use blood magic laws. Like, we're talking about the properties of magic, like Newton's laws, like laws that govern our realities. That's what he's investigating. That's what he's researching. And specifically, he researches time magic, because that's a place where we don't know a lot about how magic works with time. And you can see that in the actions in the Redcliffe Mage Quest. You know, he doesn't even understand some of the things that are happening, how you go into the future and all that. So it's definitely still an area of magic that is developing, I think. So, Garion's wife and partner for most of his life and academic career was a woman who was named Lady Livia of House Arida. And she specialized in research as well, but specifically studying the veil. So I think that their two research areas fit really well together. And they probably, worked together a lot in their research. So, okay, so how does he become a magister, right? Well, his father gave him his seat in the magisterium, trying to get him to become more of a politician rather than just an academic. So Magister Alexius became a tireless champion for education, and he especially championed the circles in Tevinter. And he also criticized the magisterium for funding wars against the Cunari at the expense of funding the circles. And he campaigned for better schooling for the Saporati. And if you remember, the Saporati is the lower class. They're not mages. I can't remember if they're the slave class or not, but I think they're just the non-magical class in Tevinter. So that tells me that he's not a wholly bad character. He's not a 100% evil person. Like, he still has morals and ethics that guide him.
And you can very much see, like, I know we're not there yet in the story, but like how this translates to Dorian as who he is as a person. Like, this whole idea of bettering Tevinter, and it can be better than it is, and funding there, and like investing in the good parts of Tevinter, he gets from Alexius. Like
absolutely.
And that's just, he's just very tragic in what ends up happening to him. Because of a tragedy, he's driven to extremes that I don't think he would get to if Felix wasn't in danger.
Yeah, I agree. So let's get into Felix. So Felix is Geryon and Livia's son, and he showed signs of magical ability very, very early in life. And however, it quickly became clear that his talent was limited. He was never going to be a full mage. Even though he had magical ability, it was not going to be, he was never going to be magister. Like, he was never going to be someone that excelled at magic. And Geryon's father, so Felix's grandfather, this is so shitty, I'm not over it, was concerned that his heir was, quote, barely more than a Saporati, and tried to have Felix assassinated.
Why are they like this?
He puts Hallward Pavus to shame, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So, Lady Livia, Felix's mom, comes in. She saves the day. She blocks her father-in-law's attempt to murder her son. And she then has her father-in-law assassinated. Good for her. Good for her. So Felix survives, as we know, into adulthood. And he doesn't become a mage. He does not become a magister. Instead, he turns out to be a very, very skilled mathematician. And his parents sent him to study at the University of Orlais. So he becomes successful in his own right, regardless of whether or not he's a mage, right? But, you know, for people in Tevinter, this would be terrible. Like, they want their lines to their family lines to have the best magic and have the most talented people. So it would be very tragic for you to have a child, for two mages to have a child who ends up to not be magical.
Yeah, which is, it just like makes you feel more endeared to him, that he like, there's like true love and admiration to his family, to his wife, to his son. Like, that he doesn't care if they're the strongest mages. He just cares that they're well-rounded people who want to do good for their country.
Absolutely. So, when Felix goes to university in Orlais, Geryon and Livia take on apprentices to help them in their research. Livia took on many assistants, kind of spreading the load throughout several different people, whereas Geryon took only one, Dorian. For the next few years, Alexius and Dorian worked on breaking the boundaries of magic itself, while Livia and her apprentices sought to determine the effects of such magic on the Veil. They were believed to be very, very close to a breakthrough when tragedy strikes. In 938 Dragon, Geryon and Livia traveled to Val Royeaux to visit Felix at the university and return with him to Tevinter for the winter holidays. While crossing through southern Tevinter, their party was set upon by darkspawn, Herlocks specifically. Though the creatures were driven off, Livia was killed, and Felix was infected with the blight sickness. Alexius basically gives up everything. He doesn't work. He doesn't do anything as a magister. He doesn't research. He doesn't do anything except for care for his son. He is obsessed with his son's health. That is his singular focus, because at this point he's lost or is in danger of losing everything. He's already lost his wife, and he might lose his son too. So that's all he cares about. And after a while, Dorian and Alexius have a falling out. And I think Dorian tells you about this. And Dorian is very grieved about his actions, because Dorian basically tells Alexius, like, just get over it already. Like, you need to move on. because Alexius is grieving deeply and is feeling guilty about everything that's happened. And Dorian is young and wants to like get back to work, basically. And Alexius isn't ready for that. Alexius is, he's still grieving. And so Dorian really regrets how brash and insensitive he was in this time. But this conversation that Dorian and Alexius have essentially ends their relationship. It ends their friendship. It ends their mentorship. And Alexius and Dorian do not speak again until he tried and failed to recruit him to be a part of the Venatori. And so up until that point, we don't really know how Geryon joins the Venatori officially, but I think we can draw some conclusions that he's desperate, and that in his desperation, he will look anywhere to find healing for Felix, for his son. And the only place he can find any kind of comfort or relief is from this crazy darkspawn madman, old god thing, Corypheus, promising him the world.
And like, I'm sure that like Corypheus is very much saying like, oh, I can control the blight. Like, he served me well. I will take away this sickness from Felix, when we don't actually know if he has the power to do that at all.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, if he could take away the blight, why didn't he take it away from himself?
Exactly.
But yeah, I think you're right that like it is a moment of desperation, and that he is just very desperate to hold on to his son and like keep his family together. And like, that's kind of like when you pass judgment on him at Skyhold, it's just like he's a man who is just lost everything and doesn't have anywhere to go. And like, he's just like, you can kill me, you can imprison me, you can do whatever you want to me. Nothing's going to hurt more than what I've already endured.
Yeah, he is, I think, the definition of brokenness when he's being judged. And I think when I first played Inquisition, I did not appreciate this. I did not understand the gravity of it. I just saw him as, oh, he's the annoying guy who made me go into the future and see scary, crazy, creepy Liliana. Like, that's how I saw him. I didn't understand half of this backstory. I didn't even really like have all the full conversations with Dorian to understand like their mentorship. So I did not appreciate the richness of this story. And in doing this research, it really, really makes me feel for him. Like, he's just a grieving father, you know? Like, and that doesn't excuse any of the horrible things he's done, but it helps us understand him. And I have compassion for him.
And it's just like, I mean, and not only just like a grieving father, but like he's also a man whose compassion extends outside of his own family, because he shows compassion in taking in Dorian, and obviously like teaches him and rounds him out as a human being, because when he takes Dorian in, he's like a party boy, and like a rebellion, and he leaves like a respected member who wants to better his country and do good in the world. And
yeah,
that's not an easy thing to do as a teacher.
No, it's not. I mean, I've been in that situation with kids like that, and it takes a long time to even get kids to trust you, much less to like have an impact in their lives and hope they change for the better.
Right.
You know, like that's not a quick process.
For Dorian to trust him, he would have to see that he's different than all the other magisters he's met before.
Yes, and like what a tragedy for Dorian too, to have like the one and only Tevinter magister who cared about you your whole life, who you thought was different, who arguably was different, to then fall prey to the same old groups that every other Tevinter falls for.
it's heartbreaking.
It is. It's very tragic. And also, I don't want to skip over this because I think it does illuminate his character so much that he even fights for more schooling and education for the lower classes of Tevinter. Like, that's significant. This is a society where it is deeply, deeply divided by class. Like, this is not an inclusive society. This is an exclusive society. This is a place where if you're not a mage, you're nothing. Where if you don't have money, you're nothing. Where if you're nothing, then you get nothing. So for a magister, someone who's raised with wealth and privilege and has every opportunity in the world to even care about or think about the lower classes in Tevinter, it takes a person with a lot of character and integrity.
Yeah, totally. Which is just like, that makes, he's such a tragic character, and you really need to dive into the lore in the games. Otherwise, you don't get that. It's just you see just every other Tevinter, but like under the surface, you hear a grieving father and a hurting man and a person who I think is even disgusted with what he's become.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I should say a grieving widower too.
Mm-hmm. And I think that we could stay here and talk about Alexius and Tevinter and Dorian for a long time, for a whole nother episode. But
probably.
We should probably. I think. Do you have anything else?
I do not.
Right. Well, thanks for this little sad ending to our episode, and thank you for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. As always, you can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast. If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, email them to us at dalorecast@gmail.com. The Dragon Age Lorecast is a part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club. You can join the Robots Radio Network Discord by clicking the link in our episode description. If you enjoyed our show, we'd love it if you'd subscribe and give us a review. See you next time.
Have you ever wanted to deep dive into the lore and stories behind all your favorite Marvel movies? Then do we have the show for you. I'm Captain Shenko.
And I'm Psych88. Join us as we dissect the media megalith that is the MCU. We'll talk about the origin stories, the fights, and everything in between.
The MCU Lorecast releases on all major podcasting platforms on Mondays as part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club and can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.